Hi, welcome. So today, as you can see, Joel joins me again, and we are going to talk about what metabolic syndrome is. As we mentioned in our last video, which was how to strengthen your immune system, we talked about the 5 risk factors. And so we figured we'd do 5 different videos on the 5 risk factors. And so today we're going to specifically talk about metabolic syndrome. So
Correct.
What can you tell us about it?
Well, first of all, thank you, Sochi, for inviting me back to the program. This topic that we're going to talk about is very important. By the way, I'm Joe Fuentes. I've been practicing family medicine for over 15 years. And it's very important that we discuss this, one of these risk factors for poor immune health, which is metabolic syndrome.
Very good. So why is it so important that we know about it and that we know how to prevent it or treat it?
Correct.
If we're diagnosed with it.
This is the importance of metabolic syndrome. Basically, it's the consumption of a lot of carbs, which are sugar.
Okay.
And sugar weakens our immune system. In fact, our white blood cells are blunted. The effects are blunted for hours after a high carbohydrate meal. So this is why having metabolic syndrome puts you at an increased risk of complications from any illness, including the coronavirus. Metabolic syndrome is made of 5 components. You have to have 3 of the 5 to be considered metabolically unhealthy or metabolic syndrome. First one, waist circumference. Waist circumference of more than 102 centimeters in males, 88 centimeters in females.
Okay.
The other risk factor is hypertension. The other one is pre-diabetes or diabetes or insulin resistance. The other one is a low HDL or good cholesterol. And the last one is triglycerides at greater than 150. So you have to have 3 of these 5 components to be considered metabolically unhealthy and thus putting you at a high risk for complications and weakened immune system.
I think also at some point we're probably going to have to break down even the cholesterol identities, as I like to call them, because sometimes they could be a little confusing, the good versus the bad, right? And so I think it'd be in our best interest to inform the audience that what they are. That way there's no question, but I'm glad you mentioned that. So what health problems are associated with hyperinsulinemia?
Yeah, meaning your insulin levels are high because you're consuming too many carbohydrates, too much sugar. When you consume the sugar, insulin has to go grab that sugar and put it away in the tissues, either in our muscles or our fat cells, because sugar is a poison in the blood, so we got to get rid of it quickly. And when you consume a lot of sugar, your insulin levels will be high, and that leads to several other conditions I like to call chaos. C being coronary artery disease, the H is hypertension, A is adult onset diabetes, O is for obesity, and S for stroke. So you're at higher risk for these conditions, these problems, if your insulin levels are elevated. And you could always go with your doctor to go get those levels checked along with your blood sugars to see where you're at, to see if you are metabolically unhealthy or have problems with insulin levels.
And if we're going to check our insulin, we want an A1C, right? Or do we want a fasting finger prick?
We could do the fasting, and you can also get the hemoglobin A1C check. That gives you your estimate of blood sugars in the past 3 months. Okay. That really what it does is measures the sugar that's found on the red blood cell.
To me, it's so amazing that our body can provide this information, and that this test was even created to determine a 3 months snapshot of our health.
Blood
right?
sugars, yep, correct. And so you can go to your doctor and get the test done, the fasting glucose, the hemoglobin A1C. You can also get your fasting insulin levels. Not very many medical providers, doctors are checking. This is actually gives you a little bit more of an exact thing going on with the insulin levels, because the sugar, once it's high in the blood, you can check it through a blood test, but you want to see how much insulin you have running through your circulation, because like I said, that leads to a lot of metabolic problems, including hypertension. There's a couple reasons for it, but one of the ones that is pretty fascinating is When your insulin levels are high, your insulin will go tell your kidneys to hold on to sodium. And sodium's not good, and you need to dilute that down. You don't want a high sodium level. So if you're not getting rid of the sodium through your urine, you are going to have to also keep water to dilute it.
Okay.
That's where you get your swelling.
Okay.
Because now you got fluids, you're retaining fluids because you have to dilute the sodium. So that's why insulin, having high insulin levels actually puts you at hypertension. One thing real quick, because one of the things that we believe is salt's bad for us, and we need to do another video explain that the problem's not really the salt, the problem is the sugar. And once the sugar is the problem, the insulin level's high, we're very sensitive to the sodium because we're retaining it, we're not losing it in the urine.
So it has nothing to do with the actual, this salt situation.
Correct.
It's that there are other issues that are going on inside of us that are unfortunately retaining, and then therefore we end up putting the blame on something that truly isn't. So we know hyper means elevated.
Correct.
Right? And so we're talking about high insulin levels. And I know I asked this in in the last video, and I know it could be controversial, especially for those that are diabetic and are currently taking insulin.
Correct. So what's your question?
My question is, if hyperinsulinemia is an issue for the reasons that you've mentioned, and yet we are prescribing, I'm not saying wait because I can't prescribe, and yet patients are being prescribed insulin, which adds more to what your body is already creating.
So what we're doing is we're not really getting to the origin of the problem. The insulin levels are high because we consume too much sugar. We got to bring the sugar down to get your insulin levels down, and go and talk to your medical provider doctor to see if they can get you off of insulin, because that's not the issue. We're producing the insulin, we're just consuming too much sugar, thus making our pancreas secrete that insulin.
I think it's so important, and I know for a lot of people it can become challenging, especially if you've lived a life with a certain lifestyle and a certain pattern of behavior. But our eating habits, our lifestyle, because I hate having to use the word diet, I will try to refrain from using it, but our eating patterns, our lifestyle, is so crucial to mitigating this situation. Like that that's almost like that's the answer, right? That's the answer.
It sounds too simple, but it really is. Food's the answer. Food's the nutritious foods, what we need to be healthy. Because if we don't fix that, and we are consuming too much refined carbs, refined sugars, we're having the pancreas secrete that insulin, and thus leading to the conditions that we just talked about earlier.
We're overworking our body. It's kind of like a car, right? Our motor. Sometimes if we're not feeding it, if we're not providing it the right gas or the right oils or whatever else goes into cars, right? It's gonna break down at some point. So our bodies is basically, we have to kind of see it the same way. That's probably my easiest analogy, that if we are not feeding ourselves with the right foods, that we will slowly break down. Slowly but surely. And if we are predisposed, which again, that's kind of almost controversial in itself. If someone from my family, my immediate family, my mom, dad, or grandparents had hypertension or had diabetes, that doesn't necessarily mean I have to have it, right?
Correct.
But if my behavior, if my lifestyle is not a good one or a healthy one, then of course my risk is going to be higher for these risk factors.
For many years we've heard that the diabetes is a genetic disease, but in my opinion, and a lot of other scientists and doctors think this way, it's a disease of habits. It's the overconsumption of the carbohydrates, of the sugars, that are causing the problem. So basically, if my mom or dad have diabetes, most likely, if I continue those same habits, I will eventually have diabetes.
So it's totally preventable. And we're talking about type 2. I think maybe at some point, because again, there's two separate type 1, we can do something completely separate video, because that happens early on for, many other reasons. But right now we're specifically talking about, type 2.
Correct. So yeah, that's that, like we talked about in the other videos, a previous video, about how sugar will weaken your immune system, but also insulin causes you to lose the important vitamins that you need to have a good immune system, such as vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc, selenium, copper. I can go on.
So we may be taking all these other things, that should be helping us, but if we're not changing our diet, what we're eating, then we're not necessarily going to benefit from these supplements.
Yeah, we're not going to benefit. We're going to be losing those supplements. So it doesn't matter the most expensive,
very expensive here
supplement.
Very expensive.
That's
here.
what it ends up being. But again, it just really, it doesn't matter what expensive supplement, the most expensive one that you can get. If your insulin levels are elevated, you're not going to benefit from those supplements.
Wow. Okay. Very interesting. Is there anything else that you really want to delve in or mention in regards to this topic?
Well, I just want the audience to know and realize that we have control over metabolic syndrome. We have to decrease the carbs, obviously decrease the processed foods, refined sugars, which do not have any nutritional value, and start eating real whole foods. And what I like to let people know, patients know, is we need to eat animal-based foods and organs that we've gotten away from, because they have a lot of the nutrition that is needed for our health.
And we know that, again, I said this before, I know that can be controversial because everyone's on a different plan, of some people are vegan, some people are vegetarian, some people are, paleo, or whatever it is that they're working on. But it's very important to mention that these organs, these animal organs, these animal products, especially if they're from well-sourced, animals, grass-fed, of course, those are going to be more beneficial to us. So it's important to know that even if you may not agree with that type of lifestyle, but the fact of the matter is that they offer us all of these nutrients that we therefore wouldn't have to supplement with if we ate them from our whole foods.
The best way to get those sources of vitamins, because they're the most bioavailable. Your body will uptake those vitamins in its natural form. So, but yeah, we can fix the metabolic problem by decreasing those sugars, and thus allowing us to have a good immune system, so we can fight off virus, bacteria.
Wow.
Especially now that we're
living in this pandemic.
So yeah, just decrease those sugars, get your insulin levels normalized, and that's so important for our immunity.
Well, it's so great to know that, one of these risk factors, which we discussed today of metabolic syndrome, is not a death sentence. This is something that we have full control over in preventing. This is obviously before getting diagnosed, but if we are diagnosed, that we can
immediately reduce the sugar.
Reduce it. Okay, so we reduce that, and then we go back into our healthy state and minimize any other risk factor that may develop from metabolic syndrome.
Correct. Yep.
Anything else you want to add or leave the audience with today?
Just take control of your health. You can fix the metabolic syndrome. Go to your doctor, get these labs checked, and start today. That way, your immune system is strong and ready when we're exposed to anything out there. Very,
very good. Very well. Thank you for joining us. We will continue with risk factor number 2. They will be in no specific order. They're not being ranked from worst to less. But we will do risk factor number 2 on a separate video, and so hope you enjoy it. And again, like always, subscribe and leave any of your comments if you would like to learn more about each of these topics. Thank you.